Welcome to the Hoja on Architecture podcast. The Architecture of Experience, Chapter 3 Measuring versus Understanding When Numbers Fall Short. In the previous chapter, we moved from abstract space to the presence of the body, arguing that space only becomes meaningful when it is encountered, inhabited, and lived. We questioned the idea of the user as an abstract figure and replaced it with the body as a situated, diverse, and active participant in spatial experience. Once the body enters space, it does not simply occupy it, it transforms it. Distances become effort, thresholds become decisions, and surfaces become conditions of interaction. Yet this shift immediately introduces a new challenge. If the body is central to design, how can it be translated into a system that architecture can actually work with? The answer, for much of modern design practice, has been measurement. The body is studied, recorded, and reduced into data that can be standardized and applied across different contexts. Anthropometric tables define reach, height, and proportion. Ergonomic guidelines establish minimums and maximums. Spatial standards ensure that environments are functional, accessible, and safe. These systems allow design to operate with a degree of consistency and predictability, transforming the complexity of human bodies into something that can be integrated into drawings, specifications, and built environments. Without measurement, design would struggle to move beyond intuition. This reliance on measurement is not a flaw but a necessity. Architecture requires tools that can translate experience into decisions, and numbers provide a common language through which this translation can occur. They enable coordination across disciplines, support regulatory and safety requirements, and allow design to scale beyond individual cases. In this sense, measurement is not opposed to experience, but is an attempt to engage with it in a structured way. It offers a form of control within a field that is otherwise highly variable and uncertain. However, this translation comes at a cost. The moment the body is measured, something is inevitably lost. Experience is reduced to dimension, variability to averages, and movement to static positions. What was once fluid becomes fixed, and what was once dynamic becomes standardized. A seated posture becomes a diagram. A reach becomes a distance. A moment of discomfort becomes a threshold value. These transformations make the body legible to design systems, but they also simplify it in ways that can obscure its complexity. This simplification becomes particularly problematic when measurement begins to stand in for understanding. Numbers provide clarity and precision, but they do not necessarily capture what it feels like to inhabit space. A chair may meet all ergonomic standards and still feel uncomfortable over time. A corridor may comply with regulations and yet feel constricted or disorienting. These discrepancies reveal a gap between what can be measured and what is actually experienced. The presence of data does not guarantee quality. At the center of this gap lies the distinction between quantification and interpretation. Measurement provides information, but it does not explain how that information will be lived. It tells us how far a body can reach, but not how that reach is perceived. It defines how long a person can sit within acceptable limits, but not how fatigue accumulates over time. It establishes thresholds for comfort, but not the subtle variations that make one space feel inviting and another feel oppressive. In other words, measurement describes conditions, but experience emerges through interaction. This tension is often masked by what could be called the illusion of precision. Numbers appear exact, and their presence suggests certainty. When a dimension is specified, it feels resolved. When a standard is met, it appears correct. Yet this sense of precision can be misleading. The values used in ergonomic systems are not absolute truths, but approximations derived from limited datasets. They are based on assumptions about bodies, behaviors, and contexts that may not fully align with real situations. Precision, in this case, is not the same as accuracy. It is a representation of control rather than a guarantee of experience. The concept of the average human illustrates this problem clearly. To make measurements operational, data is often aggregated into standard figures that represent a typical body. These figures are then used as the basis for design decisions, creating environments that are intended to work for the majority. However, the average is a statistical abstraction, not a real person. It smooths out differences and reduces variability to produce a usable model. In doing so, it risks excluding those who fall outside its range, which in practice means a significant portion of the population. This does not mean that measurement should be abandoned. On the contrary, it remains an essential component of design. The challenge is not to reject numbers, but to understand their limits. Measurement must be recognized as a tool rather than a definition, as a guide rather than a conclusion. It provides a starting point for design, but it cannot replace the need for interpretation, judgment, and sensitivity to context. To rely on measurement alone is to assume that experience can be fully predicted, an assumption that does not hold in practice. A more productive approach is to see measurement as part of a broader framework that includes observation, testing, and reflection. Instead of treating standards as fixed solutions, they can be used as references that inform but do not dictate design decisions. This requires a shift in thinking, from seeking certainty to working with approximation, from applying rules to engaging with conditions. It acknowledges that design operates within a field of uncertainty and that this uncertainty is not a weakness but a defining characteristic of the discipline. This perspective also repositions the role of the designer. Rather than acting as a problem solver who applies the correct dimensions, the designer becomes an interpreter of the relationships between the body and space. Decisions are no longer justified solely by compliance with standards, but by their ability to produce meaningful experiences. This does not eliminate the need for precision, but it redefines it. Precision becomes a matter of alignment between intention and outcome, between what is designed and what is lived. In this chapter, we have examined how the body is translated into measurement and how this process, while necessary, introduces limitations that cannot be ignored. We have seen that numbers provide structure but not meaning, and that the clarity they offer can sometimes conceal the complexity of experience. More importantly, we have begun to question the assumption that measurement leads to understanding, recognizing instead that the two are related but not equivalent. In the next chapter, we will take a closer look at the figure that underpins most ergonomic systems, the average human. We will examine how this seemingly neutral concept simplifies complexity and quietly excludes more than it includes. The discussion will move from measurement to standardization, from data to assumption. Because once numbers begin to define the body, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who exactly do these numbers represent? This concludes Chapter 3 of The Architecture of Experience, Measuring versus Understanding When Numbers Fall Short. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.